with speech, high-functioning autism. Because of its recent discovery in 1944, Asperger's syndrome is somewhat controversial and not entirely well-known, understood developmental disorder. According to Amy Klint and Fred Volkmar, History of Asperger's Disorder 1, Hans Asperger, an Austrian pediatrician, observed 4 children he thought had a problem socially communicating. These children seemed to have a problem with poor communication skills, obsessive or repetitive routines, and physical clumsiness. Hans Asperger called this condition that he discovered autistic psychopathy. Due to this disrespectful name, psychopathy, Hans Asperger didn't become very well known until 1981 when Lorna Wing, an English doctor, published a series of studies showing the same symptoms that Hans Asperger had once presented. Instead of autistic psychopathy, Lorna Wing renamed her previous discovery Asperger's syndrome after Hans Asperger, who first discovered it. Without using the word psychopathy, people more willingly accepted the syndrome that was discovered. Asperger's syndrome became an official disease in 1992 when it was published in the International Classification of Diseases, and in 1995 it was added to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Since the discovery of Asperger's syndrome in 1944, the disease has become a very common disease in people today. Asperger's syndrome affects the lives of many people and their families, just as it has affected the life of my cousin Jack. Jack was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when he started preschool. People need to be informed on this disease for the social health of children. Asperger's syndrome is a well-known developmental disorder that presents very distinct signs and symptoms of people of all ages. According to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, Asperger's syndrome is a developmental disorder that affects a person's ability to socialize and communicate effectively with other people. Doctors group Asperger's syndrome with other conditions that are called autism spectrum disorders or pervasive developmental disorders. Asperger's syndrome is a much milder form of autism. Children with Asperger's syndrome typically exhibit social awkwardness and an interest in specific topics. People with Asperger's syndrome have poor communication skills, whether it's being able to communicate in a group or one-on-one. They have a hard time getting their point across and expressing their feelings out loud. People affected by Asperger's syndrome often have a delay in developing their motor skills. Any physical activity such as walking, running, jumping, catching a ball, or pedaling a bike is difficult for people with this disease. Developing these motor skills takes time and practice. According to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, Asperger's syndrome presents some very distinct signs and symptoms from childhood through adulthood. Childhood symptoms are usually noticed when a child begins to interact with other children. Children lack the ability to communicate one-on-one and maintain a steady conversation. They become easily distracted by their surroundings and show more interest in them than the conversation they are having. While having this conversation, children avoid eye contact and express unusual facial expressions. Children like to have the same exact routine every single day. Change is not accepted very well in a child with Asperger's syndrome. Childhood symptoms continue throughout the adolescent years along with any new symptoms that might come about. Teens begin to realize they communicate differently than other teens. Realizing they communicate differently, teens are usually shy and find it frustrating to fit in. Not only being able to fit in can cause a teen to isolate themselves and suffer from depression or anxiety. These symptoms continue into adulthood. Adults usually have a good understanding of their surroundings. Most adults learn to cope with Asperger's syndrome and many end up living married and successful lives. According to the Mayo Clinic staff, too, there is no cure for Asperger's syndrome, but some treatments can help a person have better social skills. Children can go through communication and social skills training where professionals meet with children and teach them a new way on how to communicate. Along with teaching communication skills, professionals teach children how to use gestures, make eye contact, and change the tone of their voice. People diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome can receive behavioral therapy that helps a child to cope with their obsessions, meltdowns, and outbursts. Children learn to cope with their disease and different daily situations that they experience. Medication won't cure Asperger's syndrome, but it may help cure specific symptoms of the disease. Melatonin is a type of medication that can be given to a child that has irregular sleep patterns. Melatonin helps a child to go to sleep on a regular routine. Children are sometimes put on a gluten-free diet, but there is no evidence that this proves to help treat Asperger's syndrome. Since the discovery in 1944 by Hans Asperger, Asperger's syndrome has affected the lives of many people and their families. According to the Autism Spectrum Disorders Health Center, every 4 out of 1,000 people are affected with this disease. Asperger's syndrome is a developmental disorder that prevents many distinct signs and symptoms listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder. Asperger's syndrome affects communication skills, social skills, and motor skills in children, teens, and adults. Even though there is no prevention or cure for this lifelong disease, people often learn to cope with their disabilities with the help of trained counselors. People with Asperger's syndrome grow up to lead happy and successful lives.